I've been sitting with something in the past few days, and it didn't come in as a clear thought. It was more of a pattern. It was a few conversations, a few moments, different people, always different people, but there was the same feeling underneath each one. Almost hard to describe because it was not burnout and it wasn't frustration. There was just this quiet thoughts of why? Why does this still feel like it's on me? And it wasn't in a dramatic way. It was just really just in the way that you're still involved in the things you thought you'd be out of by now. That was the moment that I was experiencing through these conversations, through these experiences. And what I understood was that when you don't stop everything to figure it out, you experience it, you hear it, you question, why is this still mine? But most people keep moving because they can handle it. They answer whatever's in front of them and they step back in wherever they're needed. And because nothing really feels big enough to really question it because it isn't all at one time, most people don't. Instead, it really just keeps happening. And after a while, well, you stop noticing how often things still actually come back to you because you've normalized it and you just start to expect it. You start to just accept that is what it is or the way it is, and you allow that. Sometimes it's easier to just let things keep happening than it is to take notice or to question it or to give pause for thought. Because when you step back and actually look at it, well, for most people, if someone were to look at the inside of their business from the outside, they wouldn't see a problem. You might feel like there is something not right, but they wouldn't actually see a problem. What they see is that things are moving. Team is there. Doesn't appear that anything is falling apart. It looks like you've done what you were supposed to do to build the business, get it moving, make it happen. But underneath all of that, the parts that they can't see from the outside in, is that there's still this thread of your being the one things route back to. You know what I'm talking about. And you've likely experienced it more times than you can recognize. And it's not that everything comes back to you, but enough of it does. And while it gives you pause for questions sometimes, you keep moving forward anyway. So even though not everything comes through you and comes back to you, but enough of it does that you can't feel as though you can fully step away from it. There's enough that's still routing back through you that makes you believe and feel like you're still the one holding the center of everything in your hands. And there are those moments where something comes back to you and you immediately think to yourself or maybe out loud, but you think, this should not still be mine. Why is this coming back to me? But you do what most people do, and that is instead of pausing, instead of questioning, you just keep moving forward. You are frustrated. You don't want it to continue this way, but you don't interrupt it. Instead, you question it and then you keep moving forward. You just keep moving almost automatically. And it's that moment that most people skip. So let's stay here for a moment because it's that moment where you have the opportunity to make a choice to choose something differently. It's that moment that most people miss because it's not a random moment. In fact, it's actually your fire. Your fire is trying to give you an indication that something's not quite right. You see, the thing is that fire doesn't shout, it does interrupt. And you can feel exactly where it hits you when you have that thought, this still shouldn't be mine. Why is this coming back to me? You know exactly where that lands for you, even if you don't choose to deal with it in that moment. That's the fire. But this is where it gets really easy to miss sometimes because technically nothing's breaking, nothing's broken. So you put it out of your mind, right? You think about it for that moment, and that frustrating moment, but then you move on. So nothing gets questioned, and instead you just stay looped into those decisions. You continue to hold on and stay super close to the execution. You even really stay hyper aware of the things that could exist without you, but they don't exist without you. And if we're being candid about it, no one's forcing you to stay there. You're getting frustrated, you're questioning it, you are experiencing the fire, and then you're dismissing it and keep moving instead of taking pause to notice. And no one forced you to stay there. You've chosen that. And oftentimes we choose that because it's worked, because you can handle everything coming to you. Honestly, oftentimes we choose it because we tell ourselves this story that it will be faster, cleaner, more reliable if we just continue in that same pattern. It's not true, but it can feel really true for you. And so you become the center. You allow yourself, that is the choice you continue to choose, is that you allow yourself to stay in that spot, in that moment, as it's repeated time and time again. And so over time, it means that everything else adjusts to that. You have now given it the signal that that is the structure. So everything adjusts to that. Now, it's oftentimes not intentionally, but it is often always very consistent because you are stepping into those repeated habits, those repeated patterns, and you teach the business and everything that goes with it how to operate in that way. So the business didn't just grow, it learns how to move through you. And I have to tell you, that's really not effort. That's not about your effort. That's not about the success or lack of success that the business and the operations are experiencing. That's actually your frequency, because that is what you are teaching the system and the structure. You're teaching it how to behave and how to route back to you. That's your frequency. That is currently the frequency at which you operate. And what you put out there comes back. But there's a point where that starts to feel a bit different. Not in a heavier, too much, overwhelmed kind of way, because you've already determined that you can handle it and that you just keep moving. But it's heavier and really what comes back is this: you shouldn't still need me. like this way. And I know we've all said that. You shouldn't still need me like this. And that is a very specific moment, mostly because now you're not unaware and you're starting to recognize the pattern. You're starting to recognize the structure, the system, the way in which it is routing, even if it was unintentional for you. But now you see it, and now you likely feel it. And so we're back to choice, where you have a decision to make. Because seeing it doesn't just change it. Seeing it is only the beginning. Recognition is just the first once you become aware of it. The truth is that for most people, even after they recognize it, clearly recognize it, they still keep carrying it. They still keep operating in that same way. You see, that's where most leaders get stuck. That's where they stay. And it's not because they don't know. It's because they don't move. Because the next step isn't operational. Up until now, we've talked about it from that space. The next step is actually very much internal, turning towards your inside. And it is really about the moment where you get to decide, because you're at choice in all of this. And you get to decide, am I actually willing to release this? Because we know you have called it out. You have been frustrated with it. You have experienced it. You have identified it. But now you're in the choice of deciding, are you actually willing to release that? And that's where your faith shows up loudly, right? Not as an idea, but as a decision, because faith is going to ask you to release it, to trust, to let it go. And that's usually the point where, when I'm in conversation with someone and we're typically not looking for what's broken. There's not that there's something broken in the business. We're not looking for brokenness. We're actually just tracing the movements of how the business is operating. We're looking at who is deciding what. Where are things routing to? Where are they going? What happens when they aren't involved? And taking that step back and taking that look, it becomes pretty clear pretty fast. Oftentimes, business owners will want to say they're confused and don't know. They're not clear. But that's not the truth. Because actually, nothing is confusing. Nothing is really unclear. It's that everything still routes back to them. And there's always this pause, that realization that they have unknowingly been operating in a pattern that they are teaching the system and the structure to route back to them. So they pause because it's a really big realization. And honestly, once you see it, once it is pointed out to you, once you see it, once you recognize it, once you're willing to acknowledge it, it's really hard to pretend that you don't. You can't go back to the way it was because you now know something new and you recognize something that you had not acknowledged before. And that's where you recognize and you start to realize that it's never a capacity issue. In fact, it's really not even a performance issue. It was the structure. Your structure of the business never got rebuilt after you outgrew it. Because what started when you first began isn't what continues the momentum as you continue to grow and move and scale and move forward. So once you can realize that the pressure that you've been feeling all this time, likely putting on yourself as well, both internal and external pressure, it actually isn't coming from growth. It's actually coming from the structure, because the structure was built in a way that no longer serves you and is still operating in a way that no longer works for you. From still being the point where everything moves through you. And yes, you can carry that for a long, long time. Most people do, especially people who are really capable, whether they've convinced themselves so or they have truly developed that as the pattern. They're very capable. And it's also likely that you have built your identity around being the one who handles it, right? You're the fixer, the hero, the problem solver. You're the one that handles everything. And that has become your identity. But I must tell you, even if all of that is true, it does not make it aligned. It does make it familiar, but those are not the same thing. Just because something is familiar because you've done it repetitively doesn't mean it's actually aligned with how you function, with how you operate, with how you desire to, for what you want going forward, even. Doesn't mean it's aligned. It just means it's familiar. And they're very different. And once you start to recognize that and see that, as we said, you're at choice. Will you release it? Will you hold on? How will you continue to move forward? Will you stop, pause, and make those choices? And if you're listening to this right now and something in you is like, oh yeah, that's me. I've done that more than once. Oh yeah, that's been my experience. Then I want you to know that you're already in the shift. Things are already changing for you. You don't need more information. You have plenty of information. You have plenty of information. You don't need more of the information, because that's also a go-to that we seek when we are contemplating change and trying to avoid it. What you actually need is a different design, a difference in your structure. You need a different design so that you can determine where your leadership will actually live, so that you can determine where your decisions will actually land, so that you can consciously choose what will still depend on you. That's not easy. It takes time. We have to unpack and undo a lot of the habits and patterns that you've already created. But it is the work that I do, not at the surface, but underneath, because underneath the way everything is currently structured is where we dig in and make those changes. It's where we dig in and reroute the structure, reroute the patterns to better fit, to be more aligned with where you are today. Because what I know to be true is that at some points, the success that was built around you really starts asking to be built beyond you. And you oftentimes feel it way before you ever get to a space of wanting to fix it. You see, it is the fire that is in the moment that you see it. The fire is that disruption that ignites the desire for your change. It indicates for you that something needs to be different. And there's a power in that disruption for you to become a catalyst for making those changes. And that is the faith and the decision to actually release it that comes next, because you must have faith and you must be willing to let go. Everything can't always route through you. I mean, it can, but you're going to continue repeating these conversations over and over again. So the faith is actually in the decision to release it, so that your frequency, as we talked about in the very beginning, your frequency shifts and it changes and it amplifies, because it is now becoming what your business will default to. once you do make those shifts and amplify your frequency and really make the choices to do that differently.
Leadership isn't what you perform, it's what you embody. If this conversation resonated, share it with someone ready to lead differently. And remember, when your faith ignites your fire amplifies your frequency. Until next time.